Why narcissists can't control emotionally detached men. There is one type of man a narcissist quietly fears. Not because he is louder, not because he is stronger, not because he knows more psychology, but because he no longer provides the one thing a narcissist desperately needs: emotional control. Most people misunderstand narcissists. They think narcissists are obsessed with power. Power is only the surface. Control is the addiction. Because control creates certainty. It tells them who matters, who stays, who apologizes, who explains, who chases, who breaks first. But every addiction has one weakness. The day the supply disappears, the addiction begins to panic. The silent strategist understands something most people spend years learning. You don't defeat a narcissist by defeating them. You defeat the need they have to control you. And suddenly, the game they spent years mastering stops working. Imagine a puppeteer standing on an enormous stage. For decades, every puppet moved perfectly. Raise one finger. The puppet smiles. Pull another string. The puppet cries. Another. The puppet apologizes. Everything is predictable. Everything is under control. Then, one afternoon, the puppeteer pulls the strings. Nothing happens. Again, nothing. The puppet simply stands there, calm, still, independent. For the first time, the puppeteer realizes something terrifying. The strings aren't broken. They simply aren't attached anymore. That is what emotional detachment looks like. Not coldness, not revenge, freedom. Most men believe emotional detachment means becoming emotionless. It doesn't. The silent strategist still feels disappointment, still feels love, still feels grief, still feels hope. The difference is this: his emotions belong to him, not to the people around him. That single distinction changes everything. Because manipulators don't control your emotions. They borrow them. Every insult, every guilt trip, every silent treatment, every attempt to provoke you is simply a request. Please let me decide how you feel today. Most people accept without realizing it. The silent strategist politely declines. There is a reason fishermen understand patience better than most people. Imagine standing beside a quiet lake before sunrise. The experienced fisherman never jumps into the water chasing fish. He prepares, waits, observes. The impatient fisherman splashes, runs, throws stones, scares everything away. Narcissists behave exactly like impatient fishermen. The moment they lose emotional control, they create noise, arguments, confusion, drama, pressure, because they believe movement creates influence. The silent strategist does the opposite. The calmer he becomes, the less control others have over him. Silence becomes his deepest advantage. Years ago, I believed explaining myself solved misunderstandings. If someone questioned my intentions, I explained. If someone accused me unfairly, I defended myself. If someone withdrew affection, I worked harder. Then one day, I noticed a painful pattern. No matter how clearly I explained, the accusations never stopped. The goal had never been understanding. The goal had always been control. That realization changed my life. Because from that day forward, I stopped asking one question: how do I make them understand me? And started asking another: why do I need someone committed to misunderstanding me? Those two questions lead to completely different lives. Before we continue, I want you to think about someone you spent months, maybe years, trying to convince, trying to satisfy, trying to reassure. Did your explanations create peace, or simply create new arguments? Don't answer too quickly, because the answer explains more about the relationship than the relationship itself. One of the first principles inside the Dark Mind Protocol is this: never confuse understanding with surrender. Inside the program, I teach how to recognize when someone is seeking clarity and when they're simply seeking leverage. That distinction alone can save years of emotional exhaustion. If you've ever felt trapped in endless cycles of defending yourself, you will find a complete psychological framework waiting for you in the first pinned comment. Today, I'm going to show you why emotionally detached men quietly dismantle every tactic narcissists depend on. Not through manipulation, not through revenge, not through games, but because they stopped participating in a game that was never worth winning. Most people believe narcissists are masters at controlling everyone. They're not. They're masters at identifying people who are easiest to control. There is an enormous difference. A locksmith doesn't open every door. He looks for the one with the weakest lock. A hacker doesn't attack every computer. He searches for the weakest password. Predators in nature don't chase the strongest animal. They search for the one separated from the herd. Human manipulation follows the same principle. Narcissists rarely begin with aggression. They begin with observation. Who apologizes first? Who fears conflict? Who explains too much? Who cannot tolerate being misunderstood? Who constantly seeks reassurance? Those people become emotional investments. Not because they're weak, because they unintentionally reveal where their emotional doors are unlocked. The silent strategist understands something most people never notice. Every unnecessary reaction is information. Every desperate explanation is information. Every emotional outburst is information. The less predictable your emotional patterns become, the less attractive you become to someone who depends on controlling them. Imagine an experienced card player sitting at a poker table. He isn't watching the cards. He's watching faces, breathing, hands, tiny changes in posture. Because experienced players know something beginners don't, people reveal themselves long before they reveal their cards. Narcissists operate with the same mindset. When they tease you, they're watching. When they ignore you, they're watching. When they suddenly become incredibly charming, they're watching. Not because they're curious, because they're collecting emotional data. They aren't asking, "Who are you?" They're asking, "How do I influence you?" The silent strategist quietly changes the question. Instead of wondering why someone behaves a certain way, he asks, "Why are they so interested in studying my reactions?" That single shift exposes manipulation much earlier. There's an old story about a falcon trainer. Every young falcon resisted the leash. Except one. One bird became comfortable. It stopped resisting, stopped testing its wings, stopped trying to fly. Visitors admired how calm the bird looked. The trainer knew the truth. The bird wasn't calm. It had simply forgotten its freedom. That story has stayed with me for years. Because many people mistake emotional dependence for love, routine for peace, submission for maturity. They stop questioning unhealthy behavior because it has become familiar. The silent strategist refuses that comfort. He constantly asks himself, "Am I choosing this? Or have I simply become accustomed to it?" The answer often changes everything. One of the greatest misconceptions about emotional detachment is believing it means caring less. In reality, it means needing less. There is a profound difference. A father who loves his children deeply, but refuses to manipulate them, is emotionally detached. A husband who loves his wife, but refuses to sacrifice his dignity to keep the relationship, is emotionally detached. A businessman who loses a client, yet refuses to abandon his principles to win them back, is emotionally detached. Detachment is not the absence of love. It is the presence of self-respect. That is exactly why narcissists struggle with emotionally detached people. Because guilt no longer works. Fear no longer works. Approval no longer works. The old buttons have disappeared. Years ago, an elderly gardener told me something I never forgot. He pointed toward two beautiful trees. One grew quickly. Its branches reached high into the sky. The other grew much more slowly. I asked why. He smiled. The faster tree spent its energy growing upward. The slower tree spent its energy growing roots. Years later, a violent storm arrived. The taller tree snapped in half. The slower tree barely moved. People admire visible strength. The silent strategist invests in invisible strength. Discipline, boundaries, patience, standards, self-control. Those things cannot be photographed, but they determine who remains standing when life becomes difficult. There is another reason emotionally detached men are so difficult to manipulate. They don't negotiate with loneliness. That sentence deserves your full attention. Many people remain in unhealthy relationships, not because they are loved, but because they fear being alone. A narcissist recognizes that fear almost immediately, and once they recognize it, they quietly begin using it. Attention becomes a reward. Distance becomes punishment. Affection becomes conditional. The relationship slowly transforms into emotional bargaining. The silent strategist breaks that cycle before it begins, because he understands something most men learn far too late. Loneliness is temporary. The loss of self-respect can last a lifetime. Before we continue, ask yourself one question. If every fear of being alone disappeared tonight, would you still allow the same people to remain in your life? That answer reveals more about your future than almost anything else. This realization became one of the deepest principles inside the Dark Mind Protocol. Because emotional independence isn't built by rejecting people. It's built by refusing to make your identity dependent on their approval. Inside the Dark Mind Protocol, I teach the exact psychological frameworks that strengthen this kind of independence, not by becoming emotionally numb, but by becoming emotionally unshakable. If that is the man you want to become, you'll find a complete framework waiting for you in the first pinned comment. There is one moment every narcissist eventually experiences, a moment they almost never expect, the moment they realize none of their usual strategies are working anymore. No guilt, no confusion, no emotional reactions, no desperate explanations, just calm. And for someone who has spent a lifetime controlling emotional chaos, nothing is more unsettling than complete emotional clarity. That is where our next lesson begins. There is a moment every narcissist secretly dreads. It doesn't happen during an argument. It doesn't happen when you finally expose them. It doesn't happen when you walk away in anger. It happens much more quietly. It happens the day they realize they can no longer predict you. For someone who survives by controlling emotional patterns, uncertainty feels like defeat. They fear what they cannot predict. Imagine trying to play chess against someone, but every move you prepared for never happens. Your favorite opening never appears. Your traps remain untouched. Your strategies become useless before the game even begins. Eventually, you stop feeling confident, not because your opponent is attacking you, because you can no longer read them. That is exactly what emotional detachment does. It removes predictability. A narcissist expects anger. You remain calm. They expect guilt. You remain respectful, but firm. They expect you to chase. You continue building your own life. Little by little, their psychological map of you becomes obsolete. And when that map disappears, so does much of their influence. The silent strategist understands a powerful truth. Predictable emotions create predictable behavior. Predictable behavior creates control. The silent treatment stops working. One of the oldest manipulation tactics is silence. Not peaceful silence. Punishing silence. The goal isn't distance. The goal is anxiety. The manipulator wants you wondering, did I do something wrong? Should I apologize? Why are they ignoring me? Many people can't tolerate that uncertainty. So they reach out. They apologize. They explain. They negotiate. Without realizing it, they've rewarded the behavior. The narcissist learns silence works. So they repeat it again and again. The silent strategist responds differently. He understands something simple. Healthy people communicate. Manipulative people calculate. If someone consistently uses silence as a weapon, he refuses to become the ammunition. He doesn't chase. He doesn't beg. He doesn't invent imaginary mistakes just to restore peace. He lets silence remain exactly where it belongs, with the person who created it. And eventually, the manipulator discovers something deeply frustrating. The punishment no longer hurts. Emotional detachment is not emotional distance. This is where many people get it wrong. Detachment does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean refusing love. It does not mean avoiding relationships. It means your peace no longer depends on someone else's behavior. Imagine the sun shining over the ocean. Some days the water is calm. Some days enormous waves crash against the shore. The sun never changes because the sea becomes violent. It continues doing what it was created to do. The silent strategist becomes like that. Other people's emotional weather no longer controls his internal climate. That kind of stability cannot be manipulated, because manipulation depends on emotional instability. The hidden reason narcissists become angry, have you ever noticed something strange? Sometimes, the calmer you become, the angrier they become. Why? Because anger isn't always about what happened. Sometimes, anger is the sound of control disappearing. Imagine spending years using the same key. Every door opens. Every lock responds. Then one day, the key stops working. Would you calmly walk away? Probably not. You would jiggle it, push harder, turn it again, become frustrated. The key didn't change. The lock did. That is exactly what happens psychologically. When guilt no longer opens the door, the narcissist increases guilt. When criticism no longer creates insecurity, they criticize harder. When emotional pressure no longer creates panic, they create more pressure. Not because they're becoming stronger, because they're becoming desperate. The silent strategist recognizes escalation for what it is, not power, panic. Stop trying to win. One of the greatest mistakes intelligent people make is believing they can out-argue a manipulator. You can't, not because they're smarter, because you're playing different games. You're searching for resolution. They're searching for advantage. You're asking, how do we solve this? They're asking, how do I regain control? Those conversations rarely end well. The silent strategist refuses to measure victory by who gets the last word. He measures victory differently. Did I protect my peace? Did I remain true to my principles? Did I keep my self-respect? If the answer is yes, he has already won, even if the other person never admits it. Years ago, an elderly monk was asked, how do you defeat someone who constantly tries to provoke you? The students expected a complicated answer. Instead, he picked up a cup of tea. He held it out. No one took it. After several seconds, he placed it back on the table. Then he smiled. An argument is exactly the same. It belongs only to the person willing to carry it. That lesson stayed with me, because I realized how many emotional burdens I had accepted without ever questioning whether they were mine to carry. The silent strategist develops a remarkable habit. Before accepting guilt, before accepting blame, before accepting emotional pressure, he asks one question: does this truly belong to me? Most of the time, the answer is no. Before we finish, think about the last conflict that left you emotionally exhausted. Was it exhausting because the situation was complicated, or because you spent hours trying to convince someone who had already chosen not to understand? That distinction changes everything. One of the core lessons inside the Dark Mind Protocol is learning to separate responsibility from manipulation. You are responsible for your actions. You're not responsible for another person's need to control, guilt, or confuse you. Inside the program, I teach practical frameworks that help you recognize that difference in real life before weeks or months of emotional energy are wasted. If today's message has challenged the way you think about difficult relationships, the complete system is waiting for you in the first pinned comment. There's only one lesson left, and it may be the most important one of all, because the final reason narcissists lose control has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with the man you become, the man they can no longer reach in the end. Every narcissist encounters one person they cannot understand, not because that person is hiding, not because that person is playing games, but because that person has stopped outsourcing his identity. His value no longer rises when someone praises him. It no longer falls when someone criticizes him. He no longer wakes up asking, who will validate me today? He wakes up asking, who am I becoming today? That single shift changes everything, because the man who defines himself cannot easily be redefined by someone else. The greatest fear is losing influence. People often assume narcissists fear rejection. Sometimes they do, but there is something they fear even more: irrelevance. Imagine an actor walking onto a stage. For years, every audience laughed, cried, and applauded exactly when expected. One night, the audience simply watches. No applause, no anger, no outrage, no emotional reaction, just quiet observation. Suddenly, the performance loses its power. Not because the actor forgot the script, because the audience stopped participating. Manipulation works exactly the same way. It requires participation, not agreement. Participation. Every emotional argument, every desperate explanation, every guilty apology, every attempt to prove your worth keeps the performance alive. The silent strategist quietly leaves the theater, and without an audience, the performance eventually ends. Real freedom begins here. There's a strange moment that many people experience after becoming emotionally independent. At first, it feels lonely, not because you have fewer people around you, because you have fewer unhealthy dynamics around you. The chaos becomes quieter. The phone rings less. The unnecessary drama disappears. Some people mistake that silence for emptiness. It isn't. It's peace. For years, noise felt normal. Now peace feels unfamiliar. Eventually, that peace becomes addictive. And once you've experienced it, you stop confusing emotional intensity with genuine connection. You stop chasing relationships that require you to abandon yourself. You stop believing love must be earned through suffering. The silent strategist learns one of life's greatest lessons. Healthy relationships never require you to become smaller to keep someone else comfortable. The mountain. Imagine two men standing at the bottom of a mountain. The first spends his entire life trying to change the weather, complaining about the rain, arguing with the wind, fearing every storm. The second accepts that weather cannot be controlled, so he strengthens his body, improves his equipment, learns the terrain. When the storm finally comes, both men face the same mountain, but only one is prepared. Life works exactly the same way. You cannot control narcissists. You cannot control manipulative people. You cannot control betrayal. You cannot control criticism. But you can become the kind of man who is no longer shaped by them. That is real power, not controlling the storm, becoming strong enough to walk through it. The silent strategist's final lesson, if you've stayed with me until this moment. I want to leave you with one final thought. The purpose of emotional detachment is not to make people love you more. Sometimes, the opposite happens. People who benefited from your insecurity may become uncomfortable with your confidence. People who controlled your guilt may accuse you of changing. People who expected unlimited access to your time may call you selfish. Don't let that confuse you. Growth often feels like rejection to those who profited from your old identity. The silent strategist accepts this without bitterness, because he understands that becoming healthier sometimes changes who feels comfortable around you. And that's okay. Not everyone is meant to walk beside the man you're becoming. Years ago, I believed becoming powerful meant learning how to influence everyone. Now I know better. Power has very little to do with influencing others. Real power begins the moment other people lose the ability to influence who you are. That realization became the foundation of everything I later built into the Dark Mind Protocol. Not tricks, not manipulation, not psychological games, but a complete philosophy for becoming a man who cannot be emotionally purchased, cannot be emotionally cornered, and cannot be emotionally controlled. Inside the Dark Mind Protocol, you'll find the complete system behind emotional resilience, strategic communication, powerful boundaries, psychological awareness, and the mindset of the silent strategist. If today's video helped you see your relationships from a completely different perspective, don't stop at awareness. Build the habits that protect your peace for the rest of your life. You'll find everything waiting for you in the first pinned comment. Final, closing, remember what we've learned today. Narcissists don't control everyone. They control those who unknowingly hand over control. The moment you stop reacting impulsively, the moment you stop chasing approval, the moment you stop explaining your worth, the moment you become emotionally anchored, their greatest weapon begins to disappear. Not because they changed, because you did. The strongest man in a room is rarely the loudest. He is the one whose peace cannot be negotiated. The one who doesn't abandon his principles to avoid temporary discomfort. The one who understands that self-respect is worth more than being understood by everyone. Never forget this. A narcissist's greatest frustration is not losing an argument. It is losing access to your mind. Protect that access. Protect your peace. Protect your standards. Because the greatest victory isn't proving someone wrong. It's becoming someone they can no longer control. And when that day comes, you won't need revenge. You won't need validation. You won't need the last word. You'll already have the only thing that ever mattered: freedom. I'll see you in the next episode of Dark Mind Protocol.